Hi guys, welcome back to Unfiltered. I know it's been a minute. I had to take a short break. Not because I ran out of things to say, but because I needed to sort out a few things. I've always said that this podcast isn't just something I do for the sake of content. It's a companion for young adults like me, navigating life one honest thought at a time. So I can't just show up halfway. I have to feel the things that I talk about. So to everyone that checked in, sent a message or even asked every Tuesday, guy, where's the episode? I want to say thank you. You reminded me that this space matters, that it's doing exactly what I hope it would, creating connection. So today we are back, and as always, we are going deep. Because this episode has been sitting in my head for a long time. Today's topic is something I've wanted to talk about for a while, but I held it back because, like I always say, every episode has to feel right, and today it finally does. So if you listen to the last two episodes, you would remember we talked about self-doubt and imposter syndrome. But here is the truth. Both of those often trace back to something deeper: low self-esteem. Because self-doubt doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It grows in the soil of comparison, criticism, and that quiet belief that you're not enough. And even when you somehow push past the doubt and achieve something, imposter syndrome shows up, whispering that maybe you just got lucky, that you don't really deserve it. The two whispers comes from the same place: how you see yourself, your words, your value. Now, the tricky part about low self-esteem is that it doesn't always look like what you think. It's not always the quiet person in the back of the room or the one person who always avoids eye contact. Sometimes it's the loudest one, the funniest one, the most stylish person there. Because low self-esteem isn't about how you act, it's about how you feel about yourself when no one's watching. It hides behind overachievement, humor, or people-pleasing. You could be the life of the party and still feel invisible in your own mind. You can post the most confident pictures online and still flinch when you look in the mirror. It's subtle, but it's heavy. And that's why I call this episode The Weight You Don't See. So, as usual, I'll go personal. So for me, growing up, I struggled with my fair share of low self-esteem. I was usually the youngest in my class, always surrounded by people older, taller, and louder. I even got nicknamed Atom because I was small. Now, I've learned to like the nickname actually, but back then, it kind of stung. It made me shrink in places I should have stood tall. I accepted things that I shouldn't have, and I downplayed myself just to fit in. And if I'm being honest, that kind of thing doesn't disappear with age. It just disguises itself. You might grow, succeed, even glow up, but that old narrative, it kind of just lingers. It shows up when you hesitate to speak, when you question compliments, or when you apologize for just taking up space. So I've studied and realized that low self-esteem often starts from home. Maybe your parents compared you to your siblings. Why can't you be more like your sister? Maybe they never praised you, or maybe they made jokes that cut deeper than they realized. Sometimes, in some cases, it starts from school, like myself, with teachers who embarrassed you or classmates who bullied you. Or even in religion and society, where perfection and humility are pushed so hard that you start to believe you are never enough. And then social media adds the finishing touch. feeding you highlight reels that make your real life feel inadequate. It's just death by 1,000 tiny comparisons. And for me, if I'm being honest, the genesis of mine was that back then I was short, and I usually agreed with the comments that I was ugly then. Now, I'm not exactly a beautiful boy, because let's be real, there are some men that are just beautiful. But I am far from ugly, I know that now, but I didn't know that then, I used to hate taking pictures because they felt like reminders that I was ugly. It sounds funny now, but back then it hurts. It shaped how I saw myself, how I walked into rooms, and how I allowed people to treat me. Like I always say on this podcast, everyone is going through something, and I am too. But the difference for me now is that I identified mine early and started making intentional efforts to change it. So much that, honestly, my self-esteem these days is off the roof, and I say that proudly, not out of arrogance, but out of healing. Here is something important to remember. You are not weird or weak for feeling this way. Study shows that 85% of people worldwide experience low self-esteem at some point in their life. That's nearly 9 out of 10 people. So, you're definitely not alone. The only difference is in how we deal with it, Some hide it, some numb it, and some, like you and me, choose to heal from it. So how do you fix something that has been a part of you for decades? The truth is, you don't fix it overnight. You walk through it, especially for those of us in our 20s and 30s. We've built habits, beliefs and whole personalities around it. So healing takes patience. For me, one of the first signs I was healing was when people started calling me proud. Because here's the truth, if no one has ever called you proud in any context, you might still be battling low self-esteem, because people label you proud simply because you've started to say no, you've started setting boundaries, you've stopped letting people use you. And that's not arrogance to me, that's recovery. So where do you start? First, you need to become aware of your inner critic. That voice that says you're not enough isn't truth. It's repetition, things you've heard over the years, things you've made yourself believe over the years. And second, which is very important, is for you to audit your circle. Surround yourself with people who don't bring you down with jokes, disguised as banter. I promise you, words have weight, heavier than, most of us admit. Third, celebrate small wins. Don't wait for big moments to validate your words. Every step forward counts. Fourth, learn to receive compliments. Stop saying it's not when someone acknowledges your efforts or when people compliment how you look or how you make them feel. Just say thank you and mean it and believe it, really. And finally, forgive yourself, really, for the years you didn't know better. Because, quite frankly, you can't heal what you keep blaming yourself for. Growth starts with grace. So, as usual, here is my reflection for you this week. What's one thing you've been downplaying about yourself? Something you are actually good at, but too scared to own. Say it out loud. I don't know. You can write it down. But you have to remind yourself that it's real. You need to acknowledge it. Because low self-esteem isn't your identity, really. It's just an old story you've outgrown. So, thank you for listening to Art Unfiltered. If this episode spoke to you, share it to someone who might need it. And as always, keep your heart unfiltered. See you next Tuesday. Bye.